There he is. That feels like a good one. That feels like a really good one. Yes. Yes, sir.
In this video, I really want to talk about what I think are the top 3 lures for the month of February. To me, the month of February really signifies like bass fishing coming back. I think that there's been a lot of anglers that have kind of taken off October, November, December, January, a lot of them out there in tree stands. And it always seems like when February rolls around, that warm weather kind of starts to creep in towards the end of February. A lot of anglers start to get excited. It is a great time to go out there and go fishing. And the best thing about February, in my opinion, is it is one of those months where you can truly catch some of the biggest bass that live in your lake. So in this video, we're gonna talk about the top 3 lures that I use, the ones that I will not go on the boat or go fishing without. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by Omnia Fishing. In this video, I am going to be talking about some different lures. I'm also gonna leave the links for those lures down below in the description. Now, I've been shopping at Omnia for the last couple of years, and I really like a number of things that they provide. Not only can you get great deals on a lot of different products that we all use, but they also have an Omnia Pro app. This is really a resource that we have as fishermen to be able to attack a body of water. Every time that I go fishing, especially on a new body of water, I look at that Omnia Pro app, I can see a lot of different things. I can see water temperature, water clarity on certain sections of a lake. I can see high definition contour maps. I can see which way the wind is blowing. So I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description for Omnia, and I really appreciate if you go down there and check it out. Let's talk about the first bait, and this is one that it is a great bait year-round, but in February, it stays on the front deck of my boat no matter where I go, and that is some sort of finesse swim bait. By far, this is one of the best fish catching tools that we have in the month of February. There may be some better lures that will get you some bigger bites, but this is a bait that I will throw often when I am simply trying to get a bite. And there's a lot of situations, there's a lot of times when you're fishing in the month of February where simply getting bites, generating some bites can really be a huge deal, you know, especially when you're dealing with really cold water. I mean, this the last kind of week and a half, I spent a lot of time kind of in the Midwest and South area, and I was able to generate some bites with finesse swim baits and another bait that I'm about to talk about here in just a minute. But this bait was definitely the biggest fish catcher. Now, the big thing with fishing a finesse swim bait is I always like to keep it fairly close to the bottom when it comes to fishing it in February. A lot of fish in February, you're gonna see them hugging the bottom, whether you're using kind of standard electronics like 2D and down imaging and side imaging, or if you have, you know, a live scope or a Mega Live 2, you will see a lot of fish in February because you're dealing with such cold water temps that are really hugging the bottom. So I typically like to keep my finesse swim bait really within a couple of feet of the bottom. And this is pretty simple to do, whether you have, you know, forward-facing sonar or not. I have done this for years without forward-facing sonar. It's obviously a little bit easier now that we have forward-facing sonar, but if you don't, the big thing that I like to do, I'm gonna cast that bait out. I'm gonna let it hit the bottom, and then the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna just drag it slowly across the bottom. And the big reason that I like to drag that bait for a couple of feet is I simply like to get my line down. I'm typically using a 10-pound braid to an 8 or 10-pound fluorocarbon leader, and simply dragging that bait kind of forces that line to sink a little bit more in the water column. Now, nowadays they do have some sinking braid. It's actually some stuff that I really haven't messed around a whole lot with. So if you've messed with that, let me know down below in the comment section. If you had, I would love to hear your just what you have to say about that sinking braid. But what I like to do is just drag that bait across the bottom. And what I found interesting over the years is you'd be surprised at how many times you actually get bit while simply dragging this for a foot or two. I think a lot of fish will actually hone in on this bait as it's falling to the bottom. And as soon as it hits the bottom, they just get over top of it and they're just looking at that bait. And when you start to drag it across the bottom, you'd be surprised at how many fish will actually pick that up off the bottom. Now, after I drag it for just a couple of feet, and after I get that line down in the water column, I'm gonna start reeling. I'm gonna simply start reeling. And the big thing is you will figure out kind of a cadence that works for the setup that you are fishing in the depth that you are fishing. You know, sometimes when you're fishing in February, you're not always gonna catch fish super deep. You might catch them in 7, 8, 9 foot of water. And then there are times where you might catch them in 15, 20, 25 foot of water. So the biggest thing, I'm gonna use a different size jig head depending on the depth that I'm fishing. Obviously a lighter jig head for shallower water, a heavier jig head for deeper water. But you will kind of find a cadence where you are keeping that bait just above the bottom, maybe a foot, maybe 2 foot up above the bottom. That's really where I like to keep it. And the best way to kind of check yourself while you make this cast is simply kill that bait from time to time. As you're reeling it back towards you in the boat, just kill the bait and kind of see how long it takes to get to the bottom. If it's taking a long time to get to the bottom, that probably means you're reeling too fast. You're causing that bait to lift too high in the water column. And when you kill it, it sinks for a long time. But if you kill that bait and it just falls for a second or two and then hits the bottom, you know that you're in that good strike zone, that kind of area just above the bottom. Now, I don't like to do a whole lot with my, finesse swim bait in the month of February besides just reeling that sucker in, just really reeling it in, kind of having a steady pull. I do find at times, not only do you get bites when you're dragging it up front, but sometimes when you do kill it and that bait kind of pendulums back to you, you will also get some bites there. So that's why I also like to do that a couple of times throughout a cast. Now, when it comes to the swim bait itself, there are a number of really good swim baits out there on the market, finesse swim baits. Two that I absolutely love, the ones that I definitely fish the most, are the Swing Impact. I like the fat one. I also like kind of the regular shiner style bait that's a little bit skinnier. That one is just a little bit easier to get down deeper in the water column. So if I'm fishing in really deep water, I really like that shiner style swim bait because it allows me to get it really deep. The other one that I really like is the Megabass Spark Shad. This is a very, very good little bait, and you can see on the Spark Shad it has a very small tail on it, so it doesn't have a tremendous kicking motion, which I also like in the month of February. In February, you're dealing with cold water. You don't always like a tremendous amount of thump. That's really gonna be a little bit too aggressive for some bass. So those baits are ones that I like. I typically use small ones. I mean, this is a 3-inch bait. The Kitech that I hold up was 3.3. This is about the biggest one that I will use, even when I'm fishing around relatively big fish. If I'm fishing in waters where 6 and 7 and 8 pounders are, it just seems like those baits get bit a lot. And again, the finesse swim bait for me in the month of February is all about generating bites. How do I go about catching bigger quality or more fish when I'm out there? Not necessarily quality. You will catch some big fish on a finesse swim bait, but let's actually get into lure number 2. It's one that I consider to be a little bit better when it comes to actually catching some quality fish. And it is one that is just a great cold water bait, and that is a jerk bait. You absolutely, whether you fish in a pond, whether you fish in a river, whether you fish in a lake, you cannot go anywhere in the month of February without a jerk bait. This has by far become a bait that we know as anglers catches fish throughout the entire year. But in cold water months, this bait definitely excels. And as a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was out there fishing. And we all know, let me pick up another bait real quick here. We all know how dominant these forward-facing minnow-style baits have been over the last couple of years. And I actually tried a couple of different fisheries to get this bite going, and you'd be shocked. I found some areas, there were some areas out there that had schools of fish, and you would not get them to touch these baits, but guess what they would absolutely come up there and kill? A jerk bait, the good old-fashioned jerk bait. So a jerk bait is a bait that I keep with me. I keep it with me all year long, but really in the month of February, it is a great tool. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions about a jerk bait that I've really learned over the last couple of years is that you really do not need to pause that bait for as long as some anglers, for example, used to. I remember growing up, I remember hearing different professional anglers talk about a jerkbait a lot. And when they talked about it in reference to colder water, you heard them oftentimes mention pausing that bait for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds at a time, meaning you would pop that bait and you would just let it sit there for that long. And although I'm sure that that can get some bites, with the advancements of technology, what I have found and what I've seen that a lot of other anglers have found as well is that bass can still like a jerkbait kind of coming to them at a pretty high pace, even in really cold water. I just was on Lake Guntersville a couple of weeks ago, and I was fishing in 41.5 degree water, 42 degree water. It stayed there throughout the course of the day. So pretty cold water temps, especially for Guntersville. We had a major cold front come through. And even with that really cold water, what I found to be the most productive way to catch fish was, one, on a jerkbait, but two, actually popping that bait kind of hard and upwards in this upwards motion. That is what really triggered a lot of fish. If I would pop it a couple times and let that bait sit there, you would see a lot of fish just come up to the bait or follow it really slowly. You actually had to kind of continuously work the bait to actually get the bait, to actually get the bass to eat it. So this is, like I said, it's kind of different. It's kind of, like I said, over the last couple of years, that is something that I have found to be very effective. It's not always about letting that bait sit there. Now, there have definitely been some times. I mean, 2 winters ago, I was fishing a jerkbait actually on Lake Erie, and you had to let that bait sit in the water column in order for a bass to hit it. But it wasn't for 15 seconds or 20 seconds. It was for about 4 seconds. You would pop that bait, you would let it sit there, and actually the smallmouth were hitting it on the pause. So when you go out there, whether you have a forward-facing sonar with you or not, simply cast that bait out and just work it. Give yourself some pops in there and some pauses in there where you're letting that bait sit for 5 or 6 seconds. But I'm telling you, I think it's better to not sit there for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I think that you can really waste too much time. I mean, if you're pausing a bait for 30 seconds at a time, it will take you like 3 or 4 minutes to make one cast. If I'm kind of fishing it a little bit faster, I can probably make about 5 or 6 casts in that same amount of time, which in my opinion, you're putting yourself in that many more positions to catch fish. So I tend to work a jerkbait a little bit quicker, not super fast and not super aggressive, but just quicker than what you used to than back in the day. Now, one big thing that I do want to talk about with the jerkbait that I think is really important is the rod. I have used a lot of different rods when it comes to fishing a jerkbait over the years. And I have found that a little bit shorter rods, kind of in that 6'8" to almost 7 foot, are really perfect for a jerkbait. And the biggest reason is that you're working this bait constantly, popping it down. And if you're using a really long rod, although that long rod may allow you to get a longer cast, a lot of times you're going to be hitting the side of the boat, you're going to be hitting the water while popping that rod. So I actually like a little bit shorter rod these days. A 6'9" is actually this rod here. It's an Arc Tharp Series one-eyed jack rod. I think it's the perfect jerkbait rod. The other thing that you really want in a good jerkbait rod is kind of a little bit more of a parabolic bending action. Now, I don't necessarily want a glass rod. I actually used to use a glass rod with jerkbaits, and you don't want to go that route because I'm not going to say it's completely impossible, because I did it for a number of years and had success, but it's usually glass rods are a little bit heavier, so it's kind of a lot more to work a jerkbait with. Also, the glass rods, you don't have as much sensitivity. And so I like a graphite rod, but one that bends a little bit more in a parabolic action. So we want that moderate action a lot of times with that. That moderate action also allows you to keep a lot more fish pinned when they run at you or run down real deep. So the big thing with jerkbaits is you don't want to lose fish. I remember losing a lot of fish back in the day by using the wrong rod, and having a shorter rod, a little bit more of that parabolic bending rod really helps with my landing percentage. Now, one other thing about the jerkbait that's important to mention is that bill size does matter a little bit with your jerkbaits. And what I mean by bill size is, if you look at these 2 jerkbaits right here, there's pretty vastly different as far as the size of the bill goes. Now, obviously, the one that has the bigger bill tends to get down deeper. So if you are fishing a bait and it needs to get deeper in the water column, it is better to go with a longer bill. The other thing though about a long bill is that it really helps to keep the hooks away from cover. So if you are fishing around a lot of cover, maybe it's standing timber, maybe it's brush piles, where that jerkbait is getting close to that wood, I really like to have baits that have a little bit longer bill. Both of these are a little bit longer in comparison to a normal jerkbait. And what that does is when it hits a piece of wood, it pivots that bait upwards, and you can see it keeps those hooks a lot further away from the wood, which helps you to prevent it just getting hung up on everything. If you have a jerkbait that has a smaller bill, those hooks will hang a lot closer to the wood, and you will get hung up a little bit more. So the bill size does matter, not only for getting that bait down deeper, but also for getting it through cover a little bit better. Now, there's 2 jerk baits that I really like out there on the market. And guys, all the baits that I'm mentioning, again, I'm gonna leave a link down below in the description. Probably my #1 jerkbait over the last couple of years has been the Berkley Stunna. This is a phenomenal bait. This particular color that I'm holding right now is the one that I have used in so many different fisheries and caught them in so many different fisheries. And it's actually called a table rock color. Now, the table rock color typically has a little bit of chartreuse on the back. You can see that it's very faint right now, and that's because I think that this color is actually best when it sits out in the sun for several days. This bait I've had a lot on the front deck of my boat, and it really kind of dulls the chartreuse out. And I don't know, something about this color, that table rock with that dulled out chartreuse, man, I have caught fish everywhere. Caught them up north on this, caught them down south on this. This color right here, I have a ton of confidence in it in all types of water colors. But the Berkley Stunna is a great bait, and also you can't go wrong with the Mega Bass Vision 110. A lot of guys know that bait. It's a very expensive bait, but that thing absolutely catches a ton of fish. Now let's get on to lure number 3. And this is one that it's gonna be the bait that I primarily use in a little bit more off-color water, and that is some sort of crankbait. To me, February and March are probably my prime time crankbait fishing. Really, you can catch fish a lot in colder water on a crankbait, and then you kind of have a resurgence of the crankbait, specifically deep cranking, when you get to the post-spawn time of the year. But during the winter, I mean February, this thing is with me no matter where I go. And I absolutely love, for example, this is a APPAREL DT8. So this actually has a very, I think it has the exact same body as a DT6, but it has a little bit bigger bill on it, allowing it to get deeper than the DT6. Now, a DT6, a APPAREL DT6, I mean, there's been Bassmaster Classics one on that bait in the month of February. So it is a great bait, but I always wanted a bait that just got a little bit deeper. That's why the 8 has really become my favorite. I think that there's a ton of bass that stay in shallow water, and even in clear water they will be there, but definitely in a little bit more stained water, you will have bass in shallow water throughout the entire year, no matter how cold that water gets. And this bait is by far one of my favorites to go out there and just cover a ton of water. And I'm gonna fish it around everything. Primarily, I'm trying to find rock banks. You know, there's a lot of different rock banks out there in the country. You may have a rock bank in the form of a riprap bank, you know, a man-made bank with, you know, riprap rocks or whatever they're called. You also may have more natural rock banks, whether that's a pea gravel, whether that's a bigger slate rock, whatever it may be. When it comes to cranking in the winter, I really like rock banks. Now, if you want to get even a little bit more precise with your cranking, something that I really like to do is find rock transitions, where you have it go from slate rock to gravel, or where you have it go from chunk rock to pea rock, or whatever it may be. Where you have those transitions, you will always find congregations of bass. Yeah, you will typically also have bass just along a rock bank, but where you have those transitions is where you can, at times, find a school of bass. You will also find schools of bass when you have little points of rock. If you have a good rock point, that is always a dynamite place to catch a bass. Especially in the winter when I'm talking about rock points, a lot of times I'm talking about bluff ends. You know, a lot of these lakes have a creek channel that swings right up against the bank. And where it hits on the bank, where that bank kind of stops, you'll have a little bit of a bluff in there. Dynamite place to catch a bass in February on a crankbait. Now, the big thing with crankbaits, as you can see here, and it's something that I will fish no matter what the water clarity is I like something red. I like something red like this in the month of really February, March, April, those 3 months, you know, kind of your pre-spawn months across the entire country, red is almost always good. Now, one of the biggest reasons for that is one of the most prominent crayfish species out there is what they call a red swamp crawler. Now, in a lot of states where you have red clay banks, those crawfish will actually kind of hunker down in their little burrows throughout the winter. Now, when they start to come out of their burrows, they have eaten some of the zooplankton that is actually in the clay itself. And because that clay has a red pigment to it, the zooplankton that it eats will also kind of carry some of that plankton. And so it will turn crawfish really bright red in color in the months of February, March, April. It is just a really good color for that reason. Also, the color red is the best color that a bass can see. Now, why I'm saying that is because I kind of have this theory that because so few people fish in the months of November, December, January, some of those, you know, holiday seasons and cold water months, I think that bass kind of go through a reset time. You know, we have seen that Berkeley, for example, has done some studies on bass where they tried to see how long a bass could remember a certain color. And they found that at max, a bass could remember certain colors for 6 months. So I think that when you have a lot of anglers that aren't fishing in those 3 months, November, December, January, the bass kind of go through a reset. They kind of forget those things that they were caught on the year prior. And so when you fire out there really obvious colors that the bass can see really, really well, whether it's in clear water or in stained water, it just gets bit. Mix that alone with the red crawfish, the red swamp crawlers, and a red crankbait like this can be very, very good in the month of February. Now, there's a lot of baits that are going to work in the month of February, and those are definitely my top 3, but one that also can work extremely well, especially if you have forward-facing sonar, is a little minnow, just like this. We see this thing winning tournaments all the time. Now, if you guys want to know a little bit more about minnow fishing, I'm going to leave a link for a video that I did right here. So you can learn a little bit, not only how to throw it with forward-facing sonar, but also how to throw it without forward-facing sonar. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one.